In just about a month, it will have been 2 full years since the Chainsaw Man Part 2 manga started serialization. 2 full years. Why does that feel like such a long time? Oh my god. In the time that this manga has been coming out, I've graduated from high school and have stumbled through completing my first year of college. And throughout that time, I've always appreciated having a series like Chainsaw Man to be there for me when education stuff and life stuff got occasionally grimy. I mean, the education stuff in particular has had its fair share of ups and downs. And you know what else has had its fair share of ups and downs? Chainsaw Man Part 2. That's what this video is about. It's about Chainsaw Man Part 2. Specifically, I wanted to touch on the similarities and differences between Parts 1 and 2 and how some of the changes between parts have affected the perception of the series by its fans. Now, I don't believe these ups and downs are something new to just the second part of the manga. I mean, the pacing of Chainsaw Man as a whole has always been best described as that one video where a car crashes into like a telephone pole and then a giant electric explosion happens. I actually think that's not a bad thing per se. The story of Chainsaw Man with Denji at its heart is at many times chaotically endearing. It's chaotically endearing in the sense that you don't have to take it too seriously to really enjoy it. With that being said, there's a percentage of people online who carry a true disdain for Part 2 in comparison to Part 1, but I believe that Part 1 has a very distinct advantage in the sense that it's already finished. The majority of its characters were sufficiently fleshed out, a bunch of loose ends were tied up neatly. Chainsaw Man Part 1 is a very well-rounded story in my opinion. Someone could stop reading Chainsaw Man at chapter 97 and leave feeling completely satisfied with the conclusion. The conclusionless Part 2, on the other hand, still has several questions that readers are still waiting to be answered, and thus, that feeling of catharsis present for so many readers in Part 1 just doesn't exist yet for many readers in Part 2. Yet is the key word here. For as weird of a guy as Tatsuki Fujimoto is, I have faith in him to write good stories. He's done so several times in the past. If that subgroup of weird, annoying Chainsaw Man fans online would just shut up for a second and give the story beats some time to play out, I'm confident that they will be rewarded with the answers to many of those previously mentioned unanswered questions. Questions like, what's up with the second Chainsaw Man? Is a fourth horsewoman ever gonna show up? Why is Fumiko even a character that exists? Okay, that last one might not get a satisfying answer, but you get what I'm saying. Unfinished story aside, there are many other facets that contribute to the fan reception of Part 2 compared to its predecessor. A pretty big one being the characters. I don't know if I've spoiled anything yet, so here's a spoiler warning if you're watching this video and haven't read any of Chainsaw Man for some reason. You've been warned. Okay. Literally, almost everyone dies by the end of Part 1. In Part 2, we are served up a relatively fresh set of characters with a few returning faces of people who weren't dead by the end of the public safety arc. Characters like Yuko, who becomes one of my personal favorites in the series, even with the short amount of time that she's in the series. Remember back when people thought she could be like Denji in disguise? That was pretty fun. Yoshida is back doing more gay octopus bullshit. He's a character who seems somewhat off compared to his appearances in Part 1. Quan Shi still kicks ass. The previously mentioned Fumiko doesn't kick ass. I don't know what she does. What is her purpose? Naita becomes a more prominent character. Some of the weapon hybrids are given names and identities as opposed to just a group of cool-looking people for Chainsaw Man to fight. Another one of my favorite characters introduced in Part 2 comes in the form of Fami, or Kiga, or the Famine Devil. She's a character kind of shrouded in mystery, and she also takes home the award for best comedic timing in the series. Of course, the most vital difference character-wise between the two parts is Denji, Chainsaw Man, taking a backseat to the protagonist of Part 2, Asa Mitaka, or Yoru, the War Devil. Fujimoto taking the risk of having this part of the story revolve around a completely new character was a decision that initially had mixed reviews from the people that I saw online at the time. And I get it, after waiting over a year and a half to see, well, Chainsaw Man again. Some people were not having it at all when we just kept getting our weekly dose of Asa and Yoru and friends. I would like to proudly announce that I was never an Asa Yoru denier. I prompt those of you who switched up on our glorious new protagonists to stay on that side. And even now, after recent events in the manga, I stand on the fact that they are both unique and interesting characters worthy of having the main spotlight on them throughout this part. Going back to how people were yearning for Denji in the very early parts of Part 2, I actually think having the audience wait for the climactic appearance of Chainsaw Man was in hindsight a great decision. That panel of Denji holding the cat stays with me to this day as one of my favorite moments in Chainsaw Man regardless of what part it's from. And it was really Denji's reintroduction to the story that saw Asa and Yoru as characters truly blossom into something that, in my opinion, was equally as engaging as Part 1 Denji. So when it comes to the characters in Part 2 compared to those in Part 1, sure, there's Fumiko and a few other characters at times feel like watered-down versions of their former selves, but all in all, I believe there's still enough great things happening character-wise in Part 2 to conclude that these new and returning characters aren't the main catalyst for some of the negative reception to Part 2 when compared to Part 1. The relationship between Denji, the protagonist of Part 1, and Asa, the protagonist of Part 2, has been one of the most enjoyable and rewarding character dynamics that I can remember from recent history. Early in this part, the two characters act as almost two sides of the same coin, and we see through events that both Asa and Denji are faced with, as well as their personal reaction to these events, many of the themes that intertwine between Chainsaw Man Parts 1 and 2. The more we got through Part 2, fans could see that Asa and Denji have had similar life experiences related to things like trauma, manipulation, and choice, or in some situations, the lack thereof. We've seen the two bond over their shared experiences in unconventional ways, and during Part 2 we've seen Asa almost follow in the footsteps of Part 1 Denji in terms of how she has dealt with all the crazy shit that happens to her. Another one of these recurring themes is intimacy, which proves to be a difficult one to comprehend for a bunch of fans online for some reason. It really sucks to see Denji being labeled as like a gooner MC, or seeing people with big followings in the community celebrate because they for some reason think that the main characters being victims of sexual assault is a win for Denji somehow. Like, what manga have you guys been reading? I've come to the conclusion that the people saying stuff like that are just doing it for attention on the internet, because if you've actually been reading the manga, it's like, it's how can you misinterpret this? Like, so yeah, as far as the themes of the story go for playing a part in the slight increase of negative fan reactions between parts, I don't think that's it. I mean, a lot of the themes present in Part 2 are extensions of themes established within Part 1. That's not to say that there isn't any valid criticism of Part 2 online, though. There are already several things that I wish were improved upon in this part. The repetitiveness of certain scenes and how that affects the overall direction of the story is a big one for myself and many others. Uncomfortable conversations are needed when it comes to Chainsaw Man Part 2, but they should be critiquing stuff like this instead of being about other stuff like this. Hell, maybe conversations need to be held about the current state of the Chainsaw Man fanbase. Maybe it's just nostalgia blinding me, but I swear during Part 1, fans seemed more patient and reluctant to just immediately hate on stuff. Again, as a reader, I trust that Fujimoto is going somewhere with what he writes, and I think we as a community are productively better off in discussing actual problems with the manga if we just cut off that weird side of the fanbase who consumes the manga through singular panels that blow up on Twitter every week. The rent-lowering gunshots analogy is one that I agree with, and, you know, if Fujimoto doesn't lock in and Part 2 kinda goes nowhere, then there will be more earned dialogues had about that. But whether or not that happens is in the hands of Tatsuki Fujimoto. So all we can really do is sit back and see what else he has to offer us. And at the end of the day, at least we get some cool fight scenes or whatever. I don't know, it's probably not that deep. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. This was my first video related to manga, so I apologize if at times my thoughts seem scattered. These types of videos are something that I'd like to get better at. I'd like to practice more. I get a lot of enjoyment out of making them too. So if you did enjoy, please, like, subscribe, comment, all the stuff that you can do on YouTube. But yeah, thanks for watching. Okay, bye.